One of the key moments that everyone is talking about is Donald Trump's fiery exchange with moderator Megyn Kelly. I spoke earlier with Norah O'Donnell and Nancy Cordes about the possible impact and about whether Trump's rivals will take him on and denounce his offensive language. We were just talking about Donald Trump because you can't talk about the debate without talking about him, in particular the exchange that he had with Megyn Kelly about the sort of words that he uses to describe women. And you had a very interesting conversation with Scott Walker asking him to respond to that. I want to play that video and then we can talk a bit about it.
Megyn Kelly asked Donald Trump about his past comments about women when Donald Trump has called women slobs and fat pigs. After she asked that question last night, Donald Trump tweeted about Megyn Kelly, calling her nasty, totally overrated, angry, and he even retweeted someone who called her a bimbo. Is this appropriate language for someone who is a Republican candidate, or quite frankly, for anyone?
Well, certainly I think Donald Trump can speak for himself. I'll tell you, I'm not going to use that kind of language. To me, I think even those I disagree with, I'm going to be respectful of. I hope people thought, a few years ago I had 100,000 protesters occupy my state capitol saying some pretty nasty things about me at the time. We didn't back down, but we also didn't go to their level. We didn't respond in kind. And I think if people want to know more than just what you do on the debate stage.
But Governor, your own party did a full dissection of what happened in the last presidential campaign about how the Republican Party does among women and how they do among minorities. If you have the leading candidate in the Republican Party saying those things about women when it was the largest gender gap in history in the last presidential election, can you denounce those comments here today, or is it just part of a freewheeling debate?
No, I think in the end, voters are smart. Voters across America, men, women, no matter where you're at age-wise, they can see the difference between one candidate and another. They don't know that one candidate speaks for the entire party in the same sense that one candidate on the Democrat side speaks for the entire party.
So, Norah, you asked him outright, will you denounce these words? And he really didn't.
He didn't. I think what he's trying to say is he's going to let voters decide on their own about the merit of Donald Trump's comments. I think what it speaks to is a unwillingness by some of the other Republican candidates to take on Trump directly, a concern about alienating what is a large swath of the Republican Party that likes Donald Trump. Also, I think, infuriating Donald Trump because they see how Donald Trump responds to anyone who takes him on with very, his style is ad hominem attacks. He attacks the person who attacks him. That is Donald Trump's style. So you see an unwillingness by these candidates to take Trump on directly. I think Dan Balz in the Washington Post, who's a very respected political reporter who's covered more than half a dozen presidential campaign, said is that at some point Republicans candidates may decide whether they need to take on Trump more directly, whether there needs to be a so-called Sister Souljah moment that has been used in politics in the past, where you take the opportunity to be a leader and say, look, this is the inappropriate language. This is not the party that we are, that's the kind of leadership that emerges. I think it's worth noting, too, part of my question was that Trump went on after the debate to continue to attack Megyn Kelly with language that I think is arguably misogynistic. And as Nancy told me this morning, I saw the tweets, but as Nancy pointed out to me, those tweets were made at like 3:48 in the morning.
Right. So he was still fuming hours later and felt that he still needed to get his point across. But I think we learned last night that he does have a weakness, that if you are going to hit back at Donald Trump, it's best to do it on a debate stage, because then you're sort of going head to head with him. He needs to respond in the moment, and sometimes he can't come up with that
Here's
response.
a really interesting point. The Republican Party specifically limited the number of debates this year compared to the last presidential election because the Republican Party leadership said too many debates hurt them. It hurt their nominee, Mitt Romney, in the long run, because what Mitt Romney had said during the Republican presidential debates damaged him in the general election, comments he made about immigration and other things. So they said, we had too many debates. Let's limit those debates because it matters. We're in this for the long haul. So I think someone in the leadership of the Republican Party says, is this fun, what happened last night? Was it good? Was it entertaining? Is it part of, just as I said, a freewheeling debate about, taking on political correctness? Or are we worried about the general election and the message that will come on the general election about becoming a more big tent party, diversified parties? Or is it just rhetoric? That's a decision that I think the candidates themselves will sort out, and that the party itself is having that debate ongoing right now. I know it's one that Republican sources have talked to me about.
Yeah, definitely. Was there anything in particular other than that stood out during the debate for you, Norah?
I thought there were a number of key moments. I think, we had Governor Kasich on this morning, a governor from Ohio who was well-liked within his party. When I covered, Congress a gazillion years ago as a print reporter, like 16 years ago, he was up on Congress, balancing the budget. He talked about that last night. I mean, he's a thinker in the party. He's a policy guy who's done a lot in the state of Ohio. And I think he stood out in that regard last night. He
also came across as very genial, sort of the antidote to Donald Trump, which is not his reputation.
Well, Charlie and I were talking about this earlier because Ron Fournier, who is a well-noted Associated Press political reporter, said one of the keys for Kasich was don't be a jerk. In fact, he wasn't a jerk because his reputation is some kinds. He's sort of a tough guy behind the scenes. But in fact, he came across as one of the nicer guys. He talked about standing up for the poor and mentally ill. He talked about gay marriage, and even though he doesn't support it as a politician, that he would love his child unconditionally if they were gay. And then he was nice to Trump. He said, look, he represents a section of our party. So, the guy who was warned not to be a jerk came across as a very nice guy.
He definitely did, which I think was probably important because, a lot of people around the country really didn't know who he was and what he was made out of. And so that's the impression that they get. Another person who's sort of new to the political stage was Fiorina. And she, it seems like when you listen to what the pundits are saying anyways, really won that earlier debate. What did you guys think of? She owned it. Okay, what did you think of her presentation?
It was remarkable because she was on that stage with a lot of longtime politicians who have done many debates, and she really cleaned their clocks. I mean, she was more comfortable than any of them. She was conversant on both foreign policy and domestic policy. A lot of them are good at one or the other, not both. And she was very specific. She said, here's what I'm going to do on day one. Here's what I'm going to do on day two. Here's how I feel about Iran. And she landed the toughest punch of the night on Donald Trump, talking about how he has changed his positions on all these issues that are of huge importance to conservatives, and he wasn't there to punch back. So, I think that she could get a second look. Right now, she's only polling at less than 0.5% in our poll. She's someone who's kind of been overlooked as a person who just attacks Hillary Clinton and not more. But she definitely could have more than held her own on the main debate stage last night. And in fact, she might have been the one who spoke up when Donald Trump was saying that it's okay that he speaks that way about women. And she could have had a great moment there saying, well, I don't think it's okay.
So based on those performances, do you think we will see sort of a shuffling as we move forward, taking more polls? Will we see Donald Trump maybe shift down a little? And we talked earlier about Jeb Bush, who didn't really make a splash per se, but maybe you don't want to make a splash this early on in the game.
I think, look, empirically speaking, the data shows that the amount of media coverage, paid media and coverage by the media, non-paid media, directly correlates with someone standing in the polls. And that just has to do with attention. And that's just tried and true in terms of if you look at that's all the data that I've sort of read and people who study this. So as soon as Trump continues to get a lot of coverage, I think he'll continue actually to maintain in the polls. I do think that, I think it's a factor of that. Over time, that may change. But I think in the short term, I still think that he remains at the top of the polls, despite what Frank Luntz said on our show this morning, that he's watching the destruction of a candidate. That may be true. I'm not sure in the short term, where early on, this is just a function of how much coverage someone is getting.
All right. Similar take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one good thing for a lot of the other people on the stage was that voters got a reminder, A, that they're in the race, that this is not just the Donald Trump show, that there are all these other very well-qualified candidates who have really interesting things to say and say it in a very interesting manner. And so they might get a second look. And I think what they're all hoping is not that people will suddenly disagree with Trump. Obviously, people, like what he's saying on immigration. At least a certain section of the GOP does. But they're just hoping that people will kind of get weary of it over a while. That they'll say, I like what he's saying, but I'm getting a little tired of the way that he says it. And now I'm going to go with, one of these other guys who shares many of his positions, but who I think, might also come across as a little more presidential.
Right, great. Well, Nancy, Norah, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, still ahead, how will last night's debate resonate with the voters? We'll hear from Republican strategist and CBS News contributor Frank Luntz coming up.